Okay, welcome to module 2 for today's class. So I am now broadcasting, I am sharing my screen again. And now we can return to our discussion on two important concepts again, right? We were talking about outsourcing and offshoring. Now, if you are a supply chain management major at Boise State University, probably you know more about these concepts than me. But for those who are not very familiar with these concepts, I will try to provide a perspective uh, by having a discussion on the literature of supply chain management. And I will a little bit talk about the background and history of these concepts. Okay. And for this discussion, I will go back to the final producer concept. Okay. Final producers are the producers of the final products. And you know the meaning of that, right? We have intermediate goods on the one hand, and we have final goods on the other hand. Now, if you are an industrial producer aiming to produce a final good, okay, you have some options. First of all, you can prefer to embrace the so-called in-house production methods. With in-house production method, um, producers decide to produce everything they need in their own production unit to produce a final good. Okay, you know my example from the last class. For example, if our industrial final good is a vehicle, according to some estimations, you need more than 20,000 components in 20,000 intermediate goods. Now, in the past, some industrialists embracing in-house production method were trying to produce everything by themselves. Namely, literally, they were trying to produce these 20,000 intermediate goods by themselves. Okay, so if you try to do that, you know you will have a strict control on the production, right? There will be a visible hand, a strong visible hand of our industrialist trying to control all aspects of production, right? And you will be self-sufficient at the same time as an industrialist, right? And with this method, you will have a formal and continual relations with producers. Here, by producers, I mean the workers, right? You will have some craftsman, handyman in your production unit. You will have thousands of foremen, unskilled and skilled workers, right? And every day you will come together to produce everything you need in your production unit, right? So as an industrialist, you will supervise these producers very closely, and you will have a formal and continual relation, right? So all these producers will have a strong commitment to your production unit. You will be like a family, right? So this control is not only about the producers, it is not only about the final good production or intermediate good production. You will even want to have a control on the natural resources you need to make the final production, right? So if you would like to produce your vehicle with this method, you need to control the steel production, for example, right? You need to have strong relationships with the steel industry, or you should be a steel industrialist by yourself, right? This was what Henry Ford did at the beginning of 20th century. He controlled everything. He was very obsessive about that because he was using this method, right? He didn't have any other choice after making a decision on this first point. So this explains in the economic literature the existence of the firms, right? Now, you know, 19th century economic theory was making a huge emphasis on the efficiency of markets, right? If markets are so efficient, and I will explain that in a minute, if markets are so efficient, I mean, there is no need to have this visible hand, namely strict control of an industrialist via their firms, right? Because if you need 20,000 different intermediate um, goods to produce your final good, right? You can buy everything from the market, right? You can go there, you can find a producer. You don't need to have a formal and continually relationship with them, right? You can have an impersonal and um, like a very short-term relationship with the sellers in the market. You can get what you need, you can pay the price, and you will be fine, right? This is the mainstream economic theory produced by Adam Smith and David Ricardo during 19th century. But the the things were very different in the real life, especially at the beginning of 20th century, right? We had strong firms which were trying to control every aspect of production rather than relying on the markets, right? In um, the imagination of 19th century economic theory, actually, we would not have any firm in the real life, right? Because one single individual could get everything they need from the market. And even assembling was not an issue, right? As an entrepreneur, you could find someone who will undertake this responsibility from the market, right? And you don't need to gather every day in a particular space to arrange all these things, right? You can gather in the marketplace, you can do the transaction, right? And then everyone can go home, right? Next day, you can meet with some other sellers in the marketplace, right? These are impersonal relationships. So this brings us to the second point. So a firm is sum of contracts, right? Contracts are long term. It is different than the ephemeral marketplace transactions. Okay, so I said a lot of things about the marketplace, about the market relations. So this is the second option that the final producers have to produce a final good, right? They can buy everything from the market. And I explained why this is also, at least in theory, a viable option, right? Here we have an assumption. Everything can be found in the market anytime, right? You need 20,000 items, and today, let's say you got them from the marketplace, okay? Here you can be sure, this is the assumption, that you will be able to find the same goods next morning in the marketplace. And the quality will be similar, the prices will be similar, right? Maybe you will work with different sellers, but you don't need to have a contract and long negotiation process with them, right? Because market will take care of everything. Okay. Now, if you compare the first two methods, okay, in-house production requires high control. It provides high security, right? Because if you can control everything, you can be 100% sure about the quality, about the sustainability of the production process, right? There will be an uninterrupted flow of intermediate goods to your marketplace because you will be the producer of these goods, right? So that's good. It is more secure, less risk, right? But controlling all the aspects of the production is costly. So one advantage and one disadvantage. High control means um, um, less risk, um, high sustainability, which is good, but high costs are the disadvantage of in-house production. What about markets? You have low control here. Actually, you have zero control here on the production process, right? If you go to the marketplace next day, and if you can't find one seller of the product you need, then all your production process in your factory or whatever can stop, right? This is very risky. This is the nightmare of modern industrialists, right? The assembly line can't stop, right? Because if it stops because of a missing component, right? This is a huge cost for you. All right. So that's why relying on markets can be very risky. So now we can talk about the third method, outsourcing and offshoring. Okay, outsourcing means delegating the production of some intermediate goods you need in your production unit to a third party. Okay, here you don't produce this intermediate good by yourself, but you also don't rely on the market mechanism, right? You find a producer and you have a long-term commitment with this producer, right? Compared to in-house production, your control over this producer is less, right? You don't have any micromanagement here, okay? You describe what you need, you negotiate about the prices, about the quality, about everything, and then you make a contract, okay? This contract doesn't include every detail. It can't include every detail, okay? It should be based on trust. I will come back to this issue, okay? And these contracts are usually long term, right? It is not a one-time marketplace transaction, okay? So the third party usually here agrees to produce this intermediate good for you for the next 1, 2, or 3 years. Okay, they are long-term contracts. So if you think in this way, outsourcing is a kind of middle way, right? A third party is not an anonymous seller in the marketplace, but it is also not your contracted workers, right? Whom you can hire or fire or like regulate all the details of the production. It is different. Okay, so this is the meaning of outsourcing, right? You outsource one part of the production to a third party. Now, this third party can be in your home country, right? As an American company, you can outsource the production to an American third party, okay? But sometimes this third party can be in a different country, right? You can make a contract, a long-term contract with a Japanese company, for example. This is called offshoring, and offshoring can be more risky compared to outsourcing because, even if an American company is not your contracted worker, because of the proximity, right? You can control them more, but it is very difficult to control a Japanese company, right? There are legal issues with American company. You can make a contract based on American laws, right? But to have a contract with a Japanese company, there should be an international commercial law and so on, right? So it is more complicated and it is more risky. Okay, now after talking about outsourcing and offshoring, I think you can see that ISI is also similar to offshoring and outsourcing, right? It is also about delegating the production of some parts of the final goods, right? This delegation can be through market mechanism sometimes, but it can also based on offshoring and outsourcing. Okay, so um, if you think in this way, the success of ISI based on outsourcing and offshoring was dependent on a few factors, right? First of all, if you work with a Japanese company, right, for example, or if you work with um, a Swedish company as an American firm, all these intermediate goods should be transported to your factory with minimum cost and in a very timely basis, right? So that's why transportation technology should be well advanced and it should make the transportation costs very low, as I said, right? Otherwise, producing everything in your factory would make sense. Um, at the same time, communication costs should be very low, right? Because you should be um, in touch with your um, with your partner companies in the same country or in other countries, right? Now, when we talk about communication costs, first of all, this is something technical. It is something about technology, right? Thanks to the communication technology today, I mean, you can talk to me right now, for example. We are on different continents, but I mean, we can set a Zoom meeting and you can see me without any cost, right? With zero cost, we can have a strong communication. For sure, this was not possible during 19th century, right? So when we talk about communication and communication costs, definitely it has a technological aspect. But at the same time, communication cost is about a common culture, right? I mean, you can talk the same language, but if your culture is different, sometimes English is not English, for example, right? But if you come from the same cultural background, for example, we can say that for you and me, right? I'm from Turkey, I have a different accent. English is not my native language, but for sure we are coming from urban culture at least, right? Most of us are secular, so most of us are westernized. We embrace Western philosophy, knowingly or not knowingly, right? So that's why even if we have different levels of command on the same language, on English, I mean, we can go along, right? We can understand each other because we have a common culture. So when we talk about common culture in industrial world, it is also about common work ethics, right? So we should have the same targets, the same morality when it comes to producing something. And as I said, commercial laws should be similar, right? There should be a convergence in the commercial laws. Otherwise, um, um, the commitments you ask from a Japanese company as an American firm can't be meaningless, right? You can't have any instrument to enforce them to stick to their commitments and so on, right? So all these things can decrease the potential conflicts, and it can allow a smooth communication and a smooth division of labor, right? So once again, let me turn back to this picture. So can you see the level of um, division of labor here? We have a producer from China, United States, Japan, Korea, Italy, France, and so on, right? And they are from different locations, they are coming from different cultures, but still they can work in the same project, right? Without coming together in the same place. So this is something impossible. We couldn't imagine that in 19th century, right? And it is not only about technology, right? These people are coming from different cultures, but they can understand each other and they can trust each other. So in this discussion, the key word, in my opinion, is trust, right? Because if you will work on the same project, you should have some agreements about everything, right? You should agree on time, you should agree on price, you should agree on the quality, you should agree on the technical details, right? And you can't include everything to a simple contract, right? And you can make the contract and some conditions can change. If you have trust to each other, you can be resilient, right? You can adjust everything. You can even agree on the points that are not included on the contracts. So that's why trust is at the center of global supply chains. Global supply chains are made possible by the trust, right? And you can only trust to someone if you have some common values, right? If you feel you are the member of the same community, right? So that's why globalization project is very important for some concepts like global supply chains, just-in-time production, ISI, offshoring, and outsourcing, right? We usually think like these are some technical issues, right? We think technology made these kind of things possible. That's true, but only partial, right? A global culture created, especially by the second globalization, was very important, right? Only with global community that creates a common culture, common values, and trust among members made these um, methods possible, actually. Okay, so let's talk about the results of ISI, offshoring, and outsourcing. This discussion can help us to understand contemporary political landscape as well, right? First of all, this industrialization strategy and these methods created a structural and spatial change, both in developed and developing countries, right? So in the East, as we explained, while mainly talking about ISI, the Eastern countries, namely the developing country, experienced the first industrialization opportunity, right? So we can talk about the industrialization of the East. We talked about that, but it also created through flying geese, right? The industries flight to other countries. With the words of President Trump, they escaped from the United States. We observed a deindustrialization of the Western countries, right? Okay. Um, with industrialization of the Western countries during 19th century and at the beginning of 20th century, we had a special change. As I have explained in our last class, industrialization in the United States and in, for example, Germany created big factories and big cities, actually, right? Detroit, Stuttgart, Manchester in the UK was a result of this industrialization process, right? And deindustrialization of the Western countries created another special change. So do you know the relevant concept to describe this second phenomenon? I will ask this question in the classroom if this will be an in-person class, and I will really wait for a correct answer. Think about that, and now I will give you the answer. Um, you know the rusting belt concept, right? So we have some now dying cities, especially in the northern part of the United States, as a result of this deindustrialization process, right? Detroit, Michigan, these cities are. This is not my observation for sure, but this is what some scholars and writers, economists say about this special change. But there are some dying cities, right? Michigan, Detroit, they are not as glorious as they are at the beginning of 20th century today, right? Okay, we have Rust Belt today. Okay, so these changes, these special changes, right? Some parts of the production are undertaken by some other countries, so the production is flying to other countries. This created a great shuffle in the labor markets, right? Unemployment in industrial jobs are on the rise today in the United States and in many Western European countries, right? And employment in these areas in the Eastern countries are on the rise right now. So middle class is in trouble today in the UK, in the United States, in Germany. This is one part of this process, but in the developing countries, a new middle class is arising, right? So some new skills are very popular today in different countries, and some skills are undesired, right? And this creates some new labor aristocracies, right? So laborer class, worker class, working class is not homogeneous, right? They have they are different aspects of worker class in any country. And now some parts of them are very popular and they are becoming the new labor aristocracy, right? And this shuffle is a technical process for sure, right? But here at the same time, we are talking about the lives of people. And this creates a social unrest. They have some political consequences, right? So we can explain the change in the political landscape in the United States and in Europe with these changes in the labor market and social unrest. Okay, what should be done to make this transition period less painful? Um, I can suggest a few reading recommendation. I can share a few reading recommendation at this point. Danny Roderick, who is my countryman actually, another Turkish guy, teaching at Harvard University, has some good writings about the answer to this question. Okay, globalization, this industrial restructuring creates a lot of social unrest. So what should be done? Danny Roderick thinks we should not sacrifice the globalization, right? You know, today there is a growing anti-globalization sentiment among the public. The reason is all these changes, right? Offshoring, outsourcing. Many people in the United States think today that globalization didn't benefit them, right? And these people are usually blue collar workers, right? And they are the victims of deindustrialization, right? But still, Danny Roderick thinks globalization in total is very beneficial. Okay, he talks about economic globalization. All this industrial restructuring increases the efficiency. So we are making the pie bigger, which is good. But the problem is how we share the pie, right? So we should find a way to redistribute the benefits of globalization equally. This is the general answer to this question from my side. Okay, for this module, I will stop here. In the next module, I will show you a very short video clip about offshoring and outsourcing. Okay, there you will see in today's, let me say, political atmosphere, you know, the trust level is not rising anymore. So the trust among nations are going down. I think you are able to observe that today. And that's why the, let me say, background, the necessary background, the necessary context for a successful global industrial division of labor is disappearing, right? And that's why global community is using some different strategies. They are using some different industrial strategies, or they are defining the global division of labor again. And that's why we have some new concepts today that are popular. Okay, offshoring, outsourcing was possible and popular 2 or 3 decades ago, but today we have something like friend shoring. And the video clip in the next module will explain that. And after watching this video clip in the last module, I will share some multiple choice questions with you. We will work on them. And this will be your next quiz that you will submit on Canvas as usual. Okay, see you in the next module.